All right, I've clicked the go live button. So I'm going to assume that we will be shortly going live. I'll give it a minute here. There we go. And we should be live. Welcome, everyone. Just going to be me today, working on kind of an interesting topic. I guess it's obviously quite topical and front of mind for a lot of players, whether you're playing in the kind of midsection of competitive play or if you're playing in the very top level of competitive play as well. We've had the balanced data slate or the MFM points updates. I've been able to play a tournament with the new points and the new units. It was a team tournament, but at the same time, it's given me a lot of insight into where I think the meta is and guard. And then in addition, I really wanted to do some content that could tackle both how to play against guard, but also how to play guard as well. Because I think guard is a bit of a unique faction. Hey, Anthony. Good to have you here, man. I think guard is a unique faction that I actually consistently run into players fall into some of the trappings, weaknesses of guard, which I'm going to be going on about later. And I actually had the opportunity recently to sit down with a guy called Jeff from Australia. We did a live interview with a podcast that he has, a YouTube channel. He's a long time guard player, and we touched on many topics, but it kind of helped me illuminate where the competitive guard player's mindset perhaps is. That is just, going 2-3, 3-2, 4-1 with an army that the internet or people like myself or my teammates say is the best army in the game, has no unfavorable matchups. So I always thought that was an interesting phenomenon because to me it always looked as if a very few specific people were doing well with the faction, and I think that that's been true for the past year. So I wanted to do some slides talking about the changes, but focusing on guard and that be applicable to people that are going to be playing in the competitive scene for the next couple of months. And I think this will be particularly pertinent if you're a teams player. And in addition to that, if you're going to be playing tournaments between now and December. And I would like to note that the Warhammer World Champs will be played before December. So if you're playing that, which I will not be, this is probably going to be helpful to you. So let's get into it. The Pyra Cup retrospective. This is going to be a series of pieces of content I think that I'm going to be doing a little bit more regularly. I've tried to put this into a bit of a more digestible format. So if you're a podcast listener, I apologize now. There will be me talking to slides, but you'll be able to download the slides. I'll make them available, but I will talk to them as well. So you shouldn't be missing out on too much, but there are some visualizations in here. It'd be great if I got your feedback on whether or not this is a good format or whether or not this works well as something that you could watch or listen to again to really take home those details. So let's get into it. The Pyra Cup retrospective, where I had the chance of playing guard, happened last weekend, and it's an absolutely fantastic tournament. Okay, we're going to be talking about a couple of pieces of content. By the way, if you have some questions, I'll take them in the closing section, but feel free to post them, and then in the closing section, I'll go through everything and detail some questions down. So feel free to write them out throughout the presentation here. Okay, we're going to be covering Pyra Cup, the current key units for guard, guard's role in teams, guard in singles. So we're covering both singles and teams, the weaknesses of guard, and coaching. So I'm going to be announcing that I will be doing some coaching coming up for a limited time here. And then closing, where I'll talk about the meta as a whole. And then in addition to that, taking some questions as well. Okay, Pyra, the potato tournament, as we found out in Polish, it means slang for potato tournament. Well, Pyra means potato. And it's held in Poznan, which is a location that is kind of known for producing potatoes. It's a really lovely place. It was my first time going to Poland, and I had a really lovely time there. It's a beautiful country. It reminded me quite a bit of home in New Zealand as well. Pyra Cup is a historic tournament, and if you weren't a WTC player, or if you haven't been around WTC, you might not have heard of Pyra Cup before. Historically speaking, it is held 3 to 4 times a year in this hotel, which is an old military villa, where they play the tournament in the hotel. So it's a really fantastic trip if you do get, in my case, invited to come and play as a part of our team, or if you are a national team that has the opportunity to come to Pyra Cup. It's an amazing opportunity to play and surround yourself with a very high caliber level of players in an environment where you will not only be well taken care of, but in addition to that, you play your games at the hotel. You're talking about pairings afterwards and before, and it's a fully immersive weekend. Excuse me. It's a fully immersive weekend of Warhammer 40k, I would say. It's 8-man team event, and the teams attending, we had Poland team A and B, which you could imagine were both quite strong. Team Germany, who pushed us to at one point almost draw, which was the same thing that happened at ETC, and Team Belgium and Team Czechia. Now, our team was one of these kind of all-star teams, but we did have a good Polish contingent there as well. So we had myself, we had Nathan and Josh Roberts, Innes Wilson, we had Typhus, Pumba, and Myson, and Brian Stipe as well. So if you don't know, and if probably most people might not know these people, but I'm going to circle them and you should be able to see. This is Nathan Roberts here. This is Innes Wilson. This is Brian Stipe from my team. This is Myson from Team Poland and my team as well. There's Josh Roberts up there. And then we've got one of our coaches, and we've got Typhus as well. Pumba doesn't seem to be in this photo. Okay, so that's the kind of context which we're playing the tournament in. It's a tournament where I'll skip back. Oh, I won't skip back. But it's a tournament where each team plays every other team in 5 rounds. Okay, cool. I'm going to go through my list really quickly because I realized just now I didn't write it down. But my list takes elements of what we're going to talk about here, which is kind of my list design philosophy that I usually take. My list was specifically designed for teams. I was not guaranteed, but I had a good indication that I would be able to pick my table. So I was able to pick the light table every time. And in teams, people that really excel in teams or perform very well typically have a very well designed list for the specific role that will be able to accentuate what they're trying to achieve on the table that they're trying to achieve it on in the meta and armies they're trying to play against. So what do I mean by that? For example, if you're playing a light table first defender list, you want to be able to have obviously a strong shooting component, but be able to pressure your opponent with primary, perhaps have scout moves, be able to block your opponent in your deployment zone, because typically you'll be playing against other armies that are designed to counter your army. You're probably going to be playing against other shooting armies. We had Nathan Roberts playing Tyranids in that case with a Crusher Stampede, which is a very similar list. It may have been the exact same list as Team USA played at the WTC. And that list in this case is a combination of kind of Exocrines, Maleceptors, but most importantly, it had the triple Tyrannifex with the Rupture Cannon. Now, you can imagine that kind of dissuades most people from wanting to really play against that, which is how kind of things go, isn't it? And so that's kind of one of the strategies that people have is if you're playing against a gun line. So I'm just trying to bring the comments up here. If you're playing against a gun line, you kind of also need to. If you're playing a gun line, on a light board, you can then expect to be playing against armies that are designed to counter you as well. So it's not a free ride. Or you might be playing against a skew list or someone who's just trying to blunt your attacks, for example. Sorry about the interlude there. I was swapping between screens as well, trying to get the comments up. It needs more word up. Yeah. Okay, give me 1 second, because I want to put this over here. I want to get rid of that. And I want to put this over here. Awesome. Cool. So my list, 3 tank commanders, Rogel Dawn, and that was what I would call my core shooting back end. So that's what I want to be shooting onto the midfield objectives. 3 tank commanders are really fantastic there, obviously, because they allow you to basically activate twice. And in a shoot versus shoot matchup, activating twice with a Demolisher Cannon is really, really powerful. Now, the Rogel Dawn, you could swap that for a Lehman Russ Executioner, but the Rogel Dawn has the 72-inch range, and it also has the blank. So the Rogel Dawn's really good against Rupture Fixes, which I thought I'd be attacked by. And then in addition, it has a longer range shooting. So that means that you can't get outranged as easily, maybe by something like Tau, for example. I had 30 Aquilons. I had 30 Catachans, 2 Chimeras, 2 units of 3 Ogryn. I had a unit of Rough Riders, Leontis, and that was kind of the core shell. I had 1 Scout Sentinel as well, and Ghost Horns as well. So there's a couple of design philosophies that really enable the list to succeed based just on that. Yes, I will get right to that, Scott, as well. So there's a couple of small things that a lot of people might not pick up on here. One is that I know I'm going to be playing against predominantly attackers that will want to attack me. So immediately as a teams list, I'm thinking, okay, probably CSM gunline, Tyranid gunline, maybe Ironstorm as well. So I want to have a couple of key components there that can immediately win me the game. In that space, I've got the Scout Sentinel, which will allow me to pre-game move and move block my opponent if I go first. Then I've got Aquilons after that, which will allow me to move block my opponent's army consistently. So if I were to go first against one of those armies and move block, their army will never be able to leave a certain choke point. And what that ends up happening, and what just small tick pieces like that end up doing, is it makes it so the people that want to attack your list would rather defend themselves and then or play against another army. Then you end up getting situations, or you're playing against armies which you can score higher against, because they wouldn't necessarily want to use their strong gun line to attack you when they could potentially lose a lot more points than they could gain by using that themselves. So they're getting a little bit deep on guard and teams and list optimization, but it's obviously something I'm very passionate about. I had the same idea for WTC when I got top undefeated individual, but I was 4 points behind Olivier Weiss there, so second highest score overall. Okay, the key units for guard. This is kind of the onion as I see it, so to speak. This is where I would not leave home with. So talk about the core of the army. Chimeras, tank commanders, Catachan jungle fighters, and of course Aquilons. Now for the rest of the presentation, Aquilons are obviously very strong, but I'm actually very confident I could do well, perform very well, even without Aquilons as well. The main reason is that Guard has a brilliant combination of the best board control in the game, and it also has very strong shooting elements to it as well. Now, this is probably where most Guard players go wrong, but they see the army as a shooting army, like Ironstorm, for example. But one of the key differences between an army like Ironstorm, even in its previous variant, and Guard, is that Ironstorm doesn't have access to midfield play. It certainly doesn't have access to OC2 bodies, 10-man units. It doesn't have very good access to transports that can be used to do disembark units, re-embark units back into with firing decks. It has, of course, rhinos, but then that's filled with expensive units which you want to trade with. Doesn't really have a lot of transport throwaway units as well. So this is where Guard really excels. And in this meta in particular, where armies have had their ceilings reduced in terms of the amount of units they've been able to field, armies are really feeling this right now. So that's why I think the Chimera would actually be the top of my list as the most important unit, along with Catachan Jungle Fighters. You could play Krieg or Krieg Warriors or Deathcore of Krieg, sorry, but the Catachans obviously have the Scout ability, which allow your Chimera to scout, which is a huge part of the board dominance that you can establish early on as well. So I never leave home without that. Now in my list for singles, I would still play 3 tank commanders. I'd play 2 to 3 chimeras, believe it or not. I actually have a singles list that has 3 of them. And then I'll play 30 Aquilons, of course. And I'd play 30 to 40 Catachans as well. Now, outside that, there's a lot of things which you can go with. What I would call the second layer of the onion, the meta adjustments, are things which depend on how your meta, or maybe even your local meta, are going to perform, right? If you have a large amount of shooting armies, or maybe you're even playing the mirror matchup, a Rogel Dawn is actually quite good there. It can blank, and you can play it from outflank, which means that with 6 belters, it can come in and shoot a hard target. It can also outrange tank commanders as well. Now, Leontis, I would always play him at the moment, but I can certainly see the argument for not playing him, given that tank commanders can now order themselves. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying not to read comments at the same time as well, but what did I run into? Yes. So Leontis is what you're going to see in still most armies, but I can certainly see an argument for not playing him. Now, I would put Leontis in core here because in a singles environment and in teams, the +1 CPN redeploy is absolutely pivotal in fueling your secondary game plan and being able to grenade consistently whilst having the CP up for respawn and Tank Shock as well. Ogryn. Now, I played 2 units of 3 Ogryn on the weekend, and they were absolutely fantastic. I wasn't using them as a replacement for Bulgrin, and in a sense, Guard has changed that way in that they don't have anywhere near as much counterpunch, and they are in some ways less forgiving now. But what I would typically do, and my singles list is 3 Chimeras, 40 Catachan, 3x3 Ogryn. I would embark the Catachan and the Chimera to start with, go first, well, or second, regardless, scout move the Chimera, and then Chimeras are your key unit to contest midfield objectives and skirmish early on. Now, a package of a pre-game moving tank that has 4 flamers in it and 16 small shots and a hunter killer missile is very, very hard for your opponent to beat. Not only because you can just leave it on an objective and then disembark 10 guys out, which makes it impossible for a shooting army to two-phase remove you off an objective. But what you can then do is you can move your Chimera, move it into position, and then disembark your Catachans on a turn, embark your Ogryn back into the Chimera from a piece of ruin. Then you can move the Chimera and shoot 6 bolters with 12 bolter shots with firing deck as well. So that, for the price point, is extremely difficult to tango with. So let's think about things in the meta right now. Jump back assault intercessors, perhaps, right? JPIs are, I think, 85, 90 points now. Okay, a Chimera and the Ogryn package is 130 points, but JPIs have no chance whatsoever at over 2 turns skirmishing against a Chimera and the Ogryns. So it's really, really tough for some armies to hit the break point where they can actually hold objectives and break your objectives whilst not consistently trading down. Really, really love this Ogryn Chimera Catachan package. I think it's really, really powerful. And that's why I don't play the unit of 6 of them as well. Okay, Scout Sentinel. I think these are perfectly reasonable to play. I had 1 Scout Sentinel, and now that they've been reduced in points, I typically see them as a Piranha. You know, we've all played against Tower before sometimes, and you think, oh man, the Piranhas are so cheap. They're quite aggressively pointed for their stat line. They can do actions. They can tag something up in combat, tank shock, whatever. They have the additional ability to move block your opponent's army if you go first, or you play against Votan or something, for example. So really good. You could play a unit of 3, but you need to have a dedicated route on how you're going to be using a respawn stratagem. I played 1 because I really wanted to test if the Aquilons were the primary unit I wanted to respawn, which I think, given the current meta, they kind of are. Now, Scions I wasn't playing, and the Hellhound I wasn't playing as well, but these are definitely viable units. The Scions, I was playing a Scion. I played 1 unit of 5 for a 50-point deep strike unit, which is fantastic. But the 170-point unit now competes with the respawn for the Aquilons as well. So it's difficult to say which one you really want to play there. I think it's really terrain dependent, and it's also quite matchup dependent as well. Against the infantry-based melee units, so Blood Angels, for example, the Scion Bomb is very, very, very powerful. In fact, I could even argue it's more powerful than Aquilons, simply because they can jump back over your Aquilons, whereas Scions, you can rapid ingress and then overwatch your opponent with very good rerolls and plasmas, which is great damage. And then you can put them on a flank where they're never going to get charged because it's an 11 charge to shoot them because you're within 12. So really good against Blood Angels, for example. The Hellhound is an actually ranged unit. It's a melee unit. It's got 3 attacks in combat, and they're all D6. I'm joking, of course, they're flamers, but really it's your melee unit that you want to roadblock things with, in my opinion. The strip cover, of course, is relevant, but I don't think it's crucial in the current meta. It also has a 1 CP stratagem where you roll 11 dice when you charge your opponent and deal the mortal wounds. Of course, known as tank shock, but I think that's how you want to play that unit. So between these compositions here, these units, I think you should probably take up 75% of the core part of your list. Then I think it's appreciative that not everyone has a huge amount of these units lying around, of course. So you could fill the rest of your list with these units in addition. Now, I guess I've said Scions and Scion Bomb here. I think it's actually correct now that I look at it to put the Scion Bomb in a stylistic kind of play style. And the Scions are 1x5, as they're described here now that I think about it, is actually very, very powerful. 50-point unit that deep strikes with 5 guys. Very easy if you want to then resecure your backline and to prevent deep strikes. but then also can just do a secondary contain or something like that for very cheap. Very good. Now the Scion Bomb is the 15-man one. That's a bit of a style choice. And that comes with Bulgrin as well. I still think Bulgrin are playable. And for a player who's looking to go 4-1, can potentially compete at the finals, I think Bulgrin are a reasonable choice there. Now, I think you can achieve, hopefully, similar results by, I mean, 6 Bulgrin is almost 2 Hellhounds when you think about it. And they actually cover very, very similar roles here. So do you need them? It's difficult to say. Armored Sentinels in here as well. I think this is perfectly reasonable. They don't have the speed, but they're quite terrain dependent, depending on the format you're playing. Mortars, I actually think are quite reasonable. Once again, that's a style and a meta choice. I wouldn't fault someone if they played 2x3 Mortars and Creed to proc Fields of Fire for 1 CP. Could be very good. And then it gives you a little bit of play into other matchups, like even if you're playing against Sisters for something like, for example. Iron Hands Draken is a bit of a counterpunch that you can play as well. So I hope that kind of helps describe kind of what to expect to play against. And if you're a guard player, what I think you should be playing. And you'll notice that when I describe all these units, I'm not saying, well, this is the best shooting unit, so take this. This is the best close range shooting unit, so take this, etc. Actually, most of my focus for list building guard, and historically has been a big emphasis, is playing the board, understanding the primary, how ruins are separated from your objective and your opponent's objective, and how to attack those. Guard is one of the best armies, and I think it is the best army at actually just playing Warhammer. It's extremely uncommon to table your opponent. It's extremely uncommon to just be wiping your opponent off the board because Guard is not the fastest army in the game. And even units that can 3-inch deep strike like Aquilons don't have huge output. In fact, the output's quite low. Now, this is the take-home one. If you're playing against a good Guard player, Guard wants to control the board and it wants to disable its opponent. Tank shock, get into combat, 10 Catachan Jungle Fighters, tag up your Monolith, now it can't hyperphase, etc., etc. Those are how you win those games. So try and prevent them from getting board control and try and stay out of range of them. Okay, so there's some of the key units. I don't think a lot of that's really changed, but I certainly think Bulgrim would have, have now moved to the outskirts, I think, for sure. And Ogrins with Chimeras, I actually think probably weren't explored enough. And had I known that, I probably might have played that combination even before the Ogryn were buffed in points. Guards roll in teams. Okay, thanks for all the comments and questions, guys. I will get these to the end, by the way, so don't think I'm not answering it. Guards roll in teams. I think Guard are the best army in the game in teams, and I don't think it's particularly close. They win on many axes here. They can play skew builds, they can play control builds, they can play all-rounders, and they can even play blunters as well. Now at Pyra Cup, we had a lot of very, very good players. We had Skark playing CSM Gunline. We actually had a couple of teams playing CSM Gunline. I was able to drastically outscore them, and my list really shined where their list struggled. So actually, Nathan Roberts and our team did really, really well with Tyranids. Actually beating Skark, I think, maybe 10-10, but then he also beat another CSM 15-5 with his Tyranids list attacking the gun lines. So just goes to show, once you've got the element of board control plus shooting, my list has much less shooting than those CSM lists, but at the same time, it attacks primary, it move blocks armies, it tags armies, and it holds primary consistently. That's where it's very strong. I think they're the best on the light board, and I think they're the best light board army. Now, for those that are unaware, these are the WTC maps. If you've never played on these before, it is a very, very good map pack, and they're broken up into light, medium, and heavy maps. This is typically a board which I would play on. In fact, my last round against Czechia, I played against Eldari on this board with my pick. And as you can see, the most identifying factor of these boards is that every objective is in relatively open space. This objective in the bottom right may look like it's not in the open, because you can hold it along this line here. However, you can drive your Chimera through this terrain plate and shoot into it, which is key. The home field objective is semi-closed, but at the same time, you have a direct attack pattern to shoot it. Now, you can obviously see that this down below is a heavy board. This is not really a board you want to play on because of a couple of identifying factors. If you were to play on this board and play against a melee army, you'd have very little ability to go through this direction and then shoot down here to clear off any melee units that are staging in these middle ruins here. This is definitely not a good scenario because they're going to be able to A, hold their primary, and then B, hit your primary. And there's no guarantee that you can hold your primary once they hit it with a melee army. An army like Blood Angels, for example, could multi-charge 2 tanks, and then with a 10-man death company, kill both, and then have 5 JPIs ready to pile into your Catachan Jungle Fighters and kill all of them in an activation. There are builds which are playable on these heavy boards. Like I mentioned, you could play more Chimeras, more Ogrins, you could play Bulgrin, you could play the Command Squad and focus on ordering in their command phase to out OC. I think that's perfectly reasonable as well. But I think they are the best light table army. They can certainly play any kind of game, but when you're in a team position, you have control of certain elements. For example, what board you're going to play on. So in that case, you want to skimp on the melee counter threats and then build more into shooting and pushing elements. There we go. So a couple of points here. They are the best army at the moment, I think, for pushing large differential, and that's primarily through objective play. I found that in WTC as well, typically the largest prime differentials are generated through primary control. It's the most direct and controllable way to create a points difference between two players. Now, in addition to that, you can have a range of different weapon loadouts for whatever meta you're expecting. For example, you might take multi-melters, you might take plasma sponsons. Plasma sponsons might be really good at deterring hordes. Multi-melters might be really good if you want to outflank, for example. And then you can take demolisher cannons, or you can take exterminators, or you can take the dawn, or you can sub out the dawn, etc. There we go. And so these are kind of the builds which I would recommend playing. First defender, you want a shooting skew. First attacker, you want a shooting skew. With a first attacker, I would recommend not playing the dawn. I would probably play a multi-melter Leman Russ somehow. All rounder, you want to just play probably 3 Russes and focus more on the board control, more of a singles army. And a blunter, you want to play much more chimeras, probably even a unit of Bulgrin. And then in addition to that, you could certainly play more secondary play as well. Like it says in red here, I don't think all of these builds require Aquilons. I know they're kind of hard to get at the moment. I certainly had to buy mine off eBay and paint them. But if you've got 10 Aquilons, I still think the army is very, very, very good. And the Aquilons, in that case, can rapid ingress onto an objective you're not holding, threaten to rapid ingress and then out OC an opponent on an objective, or they could just come in a backline, try and grenade a key unit, and then deal some damage in the backline, or they could move block, etc. Obviously, it's a unit you want 30 of, but I think you can still do very, very, very well with even 0 Aquilons, perhaps. Okay, so that's kind of guard in teams. Give them an S+ rating. There are some armies that are close to this in teams. There are armies certainly that are auto-include as well. For example, Sisters of Battle, I think, is auto-include with 3 Exorcists. Blood Angels is very powerful, but you can play Dark Angels as well. CSM is quite strong as well. I think Tyranids is very good, regardless of what build you want to play. And you'll see later on some of the weaknesses. I think Tyranids potentially can be quite frustrating for guard to play as well. Okay, guard in singles. Guard in singles. The ceiling continues to fall, and I think that's a good description of not guard's renaissance, but guard's continuation at the top, really. Top, near the top. I think, depending on who you ask, my team certainly has quite, and as you know on the podcast, we've got quite a pro guard approach to how good they are, or historically have been. But I think now it's clear that they're the top army, whereas historically they've been in the mix for those tops. But what we've seen in the MFM is that actually, and continually from points update to points update to points update, is that armies are typically fielding less units because better units and high output data sheets are actually getting more expensive. What that's meant for Guard is that some of the units like Chimeras, Ogryn, and Catachan actually just line up better and better against units in a similar points range, because those units in similar points ranges have gotten more expensive. And that's happened across all the units in the game, really. Guard has a huge dynamic, huge, large range of playable data sheets. And as armies get continually less and less points, those data sheets become more and more viable. The Ogryn is a perfect example of that. Same as the Scion Bomb as well. Okay. Guard and singles, as I think, the top army, but the margins are closing. Someone has to be at the top. Guard are at the top, in my opinion, but that does not mean simply because an army is at the top, you cannot beat it. It's an unhealthy trap to get in that mindset of either A, this person is playing the best army in the game, therefore they should always win, or B, I'm playing against the best army in the game, therefore I cannot win. Warhammer has lots of different things that happen throughout the game. Everyone makes mistakes, and Guard can make mistakes now and lose games. Definitely. Right. Many armies have had significantly increased in points. Guard have also taken points, but due to the large range, have many side grade options. Obviously, Aquilons help this, but I actually think that even without Aquilons, you could, if Aquilons' datasheet hadn't been printed, you could make an argument that Guard could still be the best army in the game. I wouldn't fault anyone for making that argument because of the board control that it has primarily. Aquilons have huge dynamic elements to them. They can move block, hit backlines. What I actually did in a lot of my games is I would triple drop them on turn 2 and create a huge tempo swing throughout the game. And then my turn 2 would have a massive amount of momentum in it, and my opponent would be on the back foot trying to catch up. What I've noticed is that actually in the meta now, and particularly in teams, most list design and armies have foregone the ability to just kill 10 models, 10 toughness 3 models with 5 up saves. It's actually quite difficult for some armies. So, for example, I played against Sisters, and I played against Imperial Agents as well, but in a similar way. And I could have rapid ingressed my Aquilons on their turn 2. I was going second. However, I actually realized that once I dropped my Aquilons in, they would actually, the remaining units they had alive, which was still a lot, didn't actually have any high volume output weaponry to kill 10 dudes. Then I knew that when I drew secondaries like behind enemy lines, established locus, or whatever, I was either A, tagging their tanks up, or B, scoring secondaries in their deployment zone and then running towards their home objective. So it's important to think about that when you're designing your list. Guard have the very strong primary and secondary play. They have the strongest primary play in the game, I would say. They have a huge amount of data sheets and multiple terrain formats and local metas. That's one of the things that if you're trying to be a successful Guard player, you need to take the advantage the most of, is understanding what is in the meta, what is to be expected, and have the right weapon loadouts to counter those things. Guard are favored versus all armies, but the gap isn't comfortable and to allow many mistakes. Guard typically loses by getting bogged down, having a large amount of early pressure and not being able to catch up on the back end, particularly with a secret mission play. Going first and then trying to out-tempo a Guard player can actually be quite a good strategy to try and win. Or having strong OC on your objective, or them not being able to break your expansion objective, etc. So that's where I think they are in singles. Now, that would be my opinion most definitely for WTC and UKTC. For GW, I would probably say it's the same. However, I think your build slightly differs for GW terrain. I really love the Chimeras and Ogryn and GW terrain, specifically with the ability to drive through terrain plates and shoot them. A Chimera hitting on 4s is still absolutely fine. It's going to be still hard to remove, especially when you pop smoke on it. And then your contents can jump out. And if they can jump out, disembark, and not be tagged, then your Ogryn then get to shoot as well. It's quite strong. That's where we are. Singles. Okay, to continue. Now, like I said, there are some loose conditions. You may look at this and think, that's quite surprising, but There are some armies which I think have direct routes to play against guard. And this is just from my opinion of what I would be worried about playing into. For example, I've lost to Anthony Vanella playing guard when he was playing World Eater as well. In fact, I lost quite heavy as well in a team tournament between in the Vibe Check Team League, I think. This is when it was Manticores, but I think similar principles still apply. Okay, Tyranids. I actually think Tyranids have one of the better game plans against guard. They can solidify their their side objective, and in addition, they can actually destroy Lehman Russ tanks through the leadership ability. So there are multiple ways of playing Tyranids, but what I would like to see is the Synaptic build. The Synaptic build has Guard has leadership 7 army wide. The Synaptic build is actually quite good at forcing battle shocks, and then you can grenade through the grenade strat a lot of guard units away. So it's actually quite a reliable mechanism there. What's really important also is that you can grenade a guard tank commander. They won't be able to shoot on death because it's not a shooting attack as well. In addition to that, you've got Shadows in the Warp, which is really useful at dropping orders across the army. When you're battle shook, you can't be under the benefit of an order. They have Lone Op. Now, granted, finding the right skirmishing units on the side objectives to play against Chimeras and Catachans, etc., can be difficult. And I think that's one thing you'd need to focus on. But they also have decent shooting, Exocrine, etc. Tyrannifex is a good deterrent piece, I would say, against guard that can definitely outrange them as well. In addition, the Synaptic detachment actually has a very valuable enhancement, which is a 12-inch no deep strike. And whenever your opponent sets a unit up on the board on turn 2, you can 4-up deny it. That's quite good against Aquilons. Not only can you stop Aquilons from hitting your either home objective or your side objective, but you can, on a 4+, just deny them from coming in. Okay, Tau. As people may remember, I lost to Tau in the LGT finals. Shadow round, sorry. Now, Tau's an interesting one. And what I'm meaning here, Tau, is I'm more aimed at the not players playing at the absolute peak, highest level. Because commonly what I see guard players lose to is moving tanks, not pre-measuring, getting outranged, and letting your opponent focus on killing assets one at a time without playing the board control. Now, I think Tau has the capability of doing that. Like Rick Cadre is okay there, but I do like Kauyon. I even like Monkar for the lethals. You can actually outrange tank commanders at 24 inches quite easily. And you've got the Devilfish Plus Breacher package to skirmish and contest the side objectives there as well. Okay, Blood Angels and World Eaters. Now, I think in the previous meta, these armies struggled, of course, against Guard, but what is likely to happen is that people will reduce the number of Bullgrim they play, and that can have a drastic impact on some of these matchups. Blood Angels can jump over Aquilons, and they still have the ability to just crank out massive amounts of damage. That plus AOC means that a guard can have an unreliable shooting phase, and you might not clear enough people as you would have thought. Then we've got World Eaters. World Eaters have the classic no fallback strategy. This can be absolutely devastating to a guard army. Once again, at leadership 7, you can often fail these. If your opponent gets, I think they're Exalted 8 bound in, and you fail the leadership check so you can't fall back, they can often kill that tank in the second phase because now guard players are skimping on the counter charge, and then you're in an absolute world of trouble. The main counterpoint to that is that obviously Aquilons are quite powerful against World Eaters, but at the same time, that does require you to have a mapped out game plan, extend, measure ranges, etc. I think at the very highest levels where players don't make mistakes like that, it's a very tough game. But for the mid tables, I think we've all heard World Eaters players saying, "Oh, I Rick guard players," and that's because really solid fundamentals at those tables is often lacking. I think I would go with Tyranids probably. I think Tyranids can have a frustrating game for guard. They can have a good tick against them, and they have a good ability to deal mortal wounds, and they can actually, which are really really powerful against trying to break Lehman Russ holes. Where are the orcs? That's a great point. I think orcs are actually good against guard as well. That is for sure. Orcs definitely have the ability to take your opponent off guard. They have a huge amount of stuff as well, and rightfully so. I think Brian, we should put orcs in this Blood Angels plus World Eaters category. Just big melee pressure lists when you don't play tight enough have the ability to hem you in your deployment zone. Then your activations are locked down. You only have a third of the activations you previously would have, and you're not playing those melee counterpunch units as well. There we go. Alrighty, some of the weaknesses of guard. So, not many, if any. Yeah, but I did kind of touch on some of those previously as well. Now, this is primarily. I'm going to be honest with you. This is not aimed at the top 1%, half a percentage of players. This is more for if you're a 2-3 player, you're a 3-2 player, you're a 4-1 player consistently. I think these are mistakes which people make. And this is how, if I was trying to give advice to people and they were going up against a guard player, for example, this is what I would try and make them look for in a game to find their win conditions. They're pretty inflexible after they deploy and the game starts. They obviously have the redeploy, but their tanks more or less move a set amount of distances, and their tanks oftentimes are locked into the side of the board which they're deployed into. One way guard players should get around that, and I don't see this enough, is putting their tank commanders into reserve, and that allows for a dynamic game plan. But once they do that, you should be able to map out the firing lanes which a tank commander will be able to shoot down. Now you can outrange tank commanders, primarily at 24-inch range. They move 13 inches maximum with an order. So if you are going to take a little gamble, make sure they need to invest the order to then be able to shoot you. A common play pattern might be, for example, you want to sneak your transport behind a staging ruin, but it doesn't quite make it. Well, if you want to go there, make sure that's going to make your opponent do the movement order to then be able to shoot you. Because then you can smoke on top of that, and your opponent will be hitting on 5s. If they don't kill your Rhino, your content's going to get out and potentially threaten their tank commander as well. Pre-measuring is a huge part of this as well. And that kind of goes on to point 2. They have a very linear movement, apart from Aquilons, obviously, which are very dynamic. But make sure you put dice around where your opponent can move to. If they're moving 10 inches, or if they're moving 13 inches, you shouldn't be under the surprise or the illusion, oh, I didn't think that could shoot me. Well, if you come to an agreement with your opponent what the lines of sight are after they move their unit, you should be able to move in relative safety. Guard players would love to take an advantage of just bringing something out on turn 1 when they go second and shooting something straight away. That's fantastic. Russes are usually quite good in a tick for tack shootout as well, primarily because they're toughness 11, 13 wounds, 2 up save. Low leadership, and that kind of ties into a couple of things that we talked about previously. Tyranids definitely take this in for advantage. One of the mechanical things which I don't see people do well enough now that I think about it as well is they don't play around reinforcements enough, and they don't try and lock down the guard assets as well as they could have as well. For example, you can tag Aquilons afterwards, and they're very poor after that. You can tag Chimeras and tank commanders as well, for example. And if you tag them with very low numbers, they're likely not going to be able to they're likely to have 0 impact in the game after that. Okay. Key challenges to solve when building to beat guard. Be prepared to fight versus chimeras on side objectives. This is absolutely key. Doesn't matter what army you're playing for, I think this is a pivotal breakpoint to be able to achieve any reasonable game plan against them. If you can't destroy a chimera on a side objective, or you haven't got a way of coming from reserve or through rapid ingress and moving and shooting it, or killing it in melee, for example, or just wrapping it with your own 10 Hormagaunts, then you haven't got a game plan. Hormagaunts, unironically, are very good versus chimeras. You can just advance and charge them from behind a wall. You out-OC the chimera, and now it's stuck in combat. They don't get to disembark because you can wrap it. There we go. Outrange or grenade tank shock tank commanders. They can only shoot when they're destroyed by the result of an attack. So if you can outrange it, it is only going to shoot 24 inches with its demolisher cannon. It has other guns, of course. But if you're playing a big shooting army, that's something that you really need to consider. Grenade and tank shock, fantastic as well. If they do position a tank commander in the midfield, focus on shooting it and chipping it down for one turn. Come in and charge it, wrap it up in combat for a turn with your tank, for example, and then shoot it and finish it off the next turn. Don't skimp out on the low volume of shots. Like I said earlier, I think a lot of people are currently doing this. They don't really have the volume to kill 10 Catachan Jungle Fighters, or they're not running a 5-man unit of Gene Stealers, for example. They don't have a little unit that can reliably just kill XYZ. And actually, that's where a guard gets a lot of their mileage when they shouldn't get it. For example, I had a Sisters player at Pyra Cup, multi-charge, 10 Catachan Jungle Fighters to out OC me, and a tank commander. He lost 2 models that had to fight my tank commander. Just didn't end up killing the Catachan Jungle Fighters. And then between my Jungle Fighters and the tank commander, I was able to kill off, I think, like 3 or 4 Sisters. And then I was actually still holding my objective. An enormous swing in the game. And it's an important thing to recognize stuff like that as well. Anti-deep strike. Yeah, it's good against Aquilons. Does it solve the problem of trying to hold your expansion objective? Potentially. But there are other ways you can do that. You can cover the puck entirely. You can have your own transports, for example. You can have infiltrate. You can have things that shoot when someone infiltrates or arrives some deep strike, like flamers. If you've got a weapon loadout where you can kill 8 or 9 guys, that's fantastic. Or you could skew more into a hull-based kind of skew list as well. That's kind of the weakness that I see. Boards can have a relatively large impact on guard as well. They're extremely powerful on hammer and anvil, for example, where you have typically a large amount of space between the 2 deployment zones. Crucible of Battle is very good for guard as well. Once again, that's where the deployment zones are very deep. Search and Destroy, for example, is a little bit more iffy because it's a bit harder for the guard army to push their tanks across to then shoot into ruins, which melee units have staged into. Kind of in addition to that, what I would say is that guard typically have a very good scout move ability, and that's a huge part of being able to play against chimeras and scout sentinels and stuff like that. If you can manage to block your opponent in the deployment zone with a cheap scout unit or cheap infiltrate unit, then the chimeras can't pregame move and get into safe positions. That is oftentimes really important in combination with having a decent turn 1 game plan against guard. If your game plan against guard is simply to move out and put a rhino on a side objective, your game plan is nowhere near good enough. One thing that I don't see people doing often enough, is putting their reactive tanks back into reserves. So obviously the Predator Annihilator is a really good example. Super common. You go to a tournament, you're going to be playing against like 5 of them probably. A lot of players don't put their Predators into reserve, which in my opinion is oftentimes a mistake. Aquilon's changed that a little bit since they can screen the reserves a bit better. But even then, you're forcing your opponent to use your Aquilons to screen. Now, if your opponent doesn't have Aquilons, for example, which I think will be reasonably common, especially in the mid-tables, or they might have 1 unit of 10, putting your tanks in reserve is going to force guard to respect that a lot more than they otherwise would. Once they're on the table, a good guard player can measure how far they can move and see if they can scoot their tank commander with a +3 to move around the corner so you can't shoot them. That's just me as I see it. I would be most worried playing against Tyranids personally, and then probably Orcs and Blood Angels as well. Especially armies that have high tempo. They have a chance to rip good secondaries on the right tempo of the board. Okay. Oh, yeah, we're on the slide already. So, I will be having some time over the next couple of months to do some coaching. Something that Vic and I have been chatting about for a while. Always kind of toyed around my head with. I will be starting to do coaching A brief bit about myself, although I'm sure most people in here probably know me already. I'm a New Zealand WTC player. Uh, Won a bunch of super majors, bunch of majors. Historically, I've played Guard a lot. I probably think of myself as a better team player than a singles player, most likely, especially recently. But I wanted to start coaching in a couple of different services. I'll be doing individual coaching where we can focus on your goals, how can you achieve them, regardless of what army you're going to play. And primarily, I'm going to be doing that through calls, but primarily through actual online coaching. We can do list building and whatever like that. I'm also going to be doing team coaching, where I'm going to be consulting people on teams on their composition, their roles, their players, what terrain formats they're going to be playing on. It's something that I really enjoy and had a lot of success with doing with Team New Zealand at the previous WTC, and of course Team Ignite as well. With team coaching, that would probably be on a one-to-many basis, so you could bring as many people from your team. Do things like matrix construction, pairing analysis, list designs, and optimizations for teams as well. If you are interested in coaching, or you think you might have someone who might be, you can inquire at 40kfireside@gmail.com. And thank you very much. I haven't settled on the rates or anything yet. They're likely to be very, very reasonable. And my time zone is reasonably flexible on top of that as well. Okay, enough of that. Okay, kind of cap things off. The world isn't burning. I think obviously Aquilons have hit quite hard, but the reality is the meta is closer than it's ever been. And one army always has to be at the top. I think Guard are in an excellent position for both teams and singles. Players that will succeed will likely practice heavily against Guard and pick armies that have options to beat them and tech choices to counter key units. Remember, particularly in teams, winning is defined on a gradient. If you say, for example, lose 12-8 against Guard, that can be a very big win. So if you've got an army which can tackle Guard in a really excellent way, attack it, for example, then that can oftentimes be the difference maker in your team winning or losing. Now, in singles, you have to skew in a little bit harder those tech choices. And most importantly, you really need to practice against Guard to actually get the flow of the game. We've got a points up. Well, I think we've got a game update. I think Games Workshop said likely in the end of the year. So what that would mean is that for Warhammer World Champs, Guard will very much likely be in the meta as it currently stands. And I wouldn't be surprised to see many lists much like the ones I just described, ones that I took to Pyra Cup. Very board focused, very Chimera heavy, and able to play very, very, very consistent games with a similar game plan each time. Something to consider. But I think the meta overall is in a good place right now, all things considered. There we go. That would be the end of it. All right, I'm going to go into some questions. If you have some questions, feel free to. That means it's free, guys. If you do have some questions, I'd be more than happy to answer some right now. So post them in the chat, and I'll just rip through them. All right, Scott Kitchum asks, and good to see you, Scott. Would love to also hear about how to make your own faction's matchup more favorable into Guard from concerned Sisters players. Yeah, it's a good question. So one thing I noticed after particularly playing at Pyra Cup is that Guard have some very frustrating breakpoints for Sisters. Mostly because Sisters are playing the triple Exorcist build now, which is reliant upon a strength 10 breakpoint. Now, unless you're within 12, your Exorcists are going to be wounding Leman Russes on 5s. And there's only so many miracle dice these people can get. The Sisters Exorcist build is actually reasonably good against Guard. But it really comes down to target priority as well. Surprise, surprise, you should kill the Chimeras first. I think that's really, really important. They are what's going to control the middle of the board. The Leman Russes, you usually have the speed to outmaneuver, and in combination of that, you've also got like a couple of key units like the Palatine with the Miracle Dice Dump. You've got Seraphim, which I know are more expensive, which are good at killing Catachan jungle fighters, for example. Now, unfortunately for sisters, guard get a lot of stuff these days. I would potentially just play 2 castigators, and I actually quite like the 1 autocannon, 1 battle cannon, most likely. But you need to be prepared to tango. I think that the Arco Flages are not a terrible choice here as well. If you have the ability to pop a Chimera that has 10 Catachan jungle fighters in it, Arco Flages is a really, really good tool to clean that up as well. Even, for example, the Seductors are not bad, but sisters probably have better, cheaper options to do that as well. I think you could go down that route, or in addition like that, you could play a very vehicle-heavy skew list. Mercenary Q says, I actually really like the Onion, really helps understand the core versus flex picks. There you go, bro. If you don't play guard, I think the Onion's really good. Those are like the core data sheets you really want to understand and be familiar with. Steve asks, did you miss the triple scout sentinels with their big move block? Yes. I quite like them, but it really comes down to a key decision point that you need to understand. Are you going to use your reinforcement on scout sentinels or aquilons? At Pyra Cup, I didn't really know that, and I was going to play the Coventry tournament, so I wanted to test that. I didn't end up playing the Coventry tournament. I wanted to chill out for a weekend and focus on life. But I wouldn't fault someone for wanting to play the 3-man unit of Scout Sentinels and maybe 20 Aquilons and focus on that to be your respawn target as well. I do think the triple Scout Sentinel is better than the triple Armored Sentinel. For me, Scout Sentinels are better than Armored Sentinels in almost every way possible. They're cheaper, you want them to die, and when they get tagged, they can still provide rerolls, and they give you a big bonus to going first. Really cool. Dakia Owen asks, Scions with the command squad? Oof. I don't mind them either way, to be honest with you. If you've got only 100 points or you've got a 50-point upgrade, I think they're a good choice to take. If you're playing with the command squad, you need to be almost committed to rapid ingress overwatching with them. I think that's the best way to use them, and that's the best way to get the most amount of value on them. So you really need to design the rest of your list archetype to playing around that being a rapid ingress on turn 2 and 3, whereas Aquilons can oftentimes compete in that slot, for example. James Harrison asks, do you get the 10 guys back, or the Aquilons with the Silent Squad? Yeah, you just get the 10 guys back. You don't get the 5 guys in addition, at least to the best of my knowledge. I've seen a lot of Lehman Russes at tournaments. Are these traps now? Outside the Tank Commander. Me personally, I think the Triple Tank Commander is the best way to go. What that does is it really allows you to lean into a direct game plan. You've got Triple Tank Commander, they can all order themselves, they can all shoot on death, and then you want to primarily focus on keeping people away from that Tank Commander. You can play one from Rapid Ingress, that works really well from Outflank as well. I played mine with Multi-Melters, they can now come in and order themselves, reliably hit on 3s. It's fantastic. I would rather play 3 Tank Commanders rather than 4 Lehman Russes. And I see a lot of lists with 4 Lehman Russes. I think 3 Tank Commanders is better. In addition, usually on points, and allows you to play field other units as well. Because remember, Guard isn't trying to table people. It's trying to remove key assets, play the game, but distract your opponent by trying to make them shoot Lehman Russes that either aren't on objectives, whilst at the same time you're just bogging down their objectives and sinking their primary. Imagine charging 8-bound charging anything when Aquilons exist. Well, you just go first. Simple. Aquilons will be in reserve. David, what's your best recommendation to counter trip TC with demo cannon? Yeah, it's tough. You need to have a good game plan. If you're thinking in teams where you can actually execute these on a regular basis, Tyrannofixes are a good pick there. Otherwise, you really need to sort of invest into... There's 3 ways, really. There's outrange them. Then there is tag them and ignore them. And then hide behind walls because they won't be able to shoot out of combat into anything interesting. Or kind of If you're a melee army, it's a bit different. So you're either trying to outrange them or tag them. In teams, you can hide and lose a game. That's acceptable. But in singles, you do want to have some kind of key tech melee piece that will be able to chew through a tank commander in combat, if possible. Even if, for example, you've got a Rhino that can tank shock a tank commander, it's a really good utility piece to have. Eric asks, do you think that the Dawn is good enough for GW terrain? In singles, and this is just my opinion, and I usually talk about the absolute just leanest lists possible because that's historically how I've played. I don't think it's optimal to play a Dawn. For example, if you're playing Warhammer World Champs, I wouldn't think it's optimal to play a Dawn. Can you win a GT with a Dawn? 100%. If you were to play a Dawn, I would suggest playing a Dawn and 2 tank commanders. I wouldn't go 3 tank commanders and Dawn if you were playing a singles tournament, for example. But the Dawn's perfectly playable and is good. It is terrain dependent as well. So what I'd recommend is putting it up on TTS, the terrain format, understanding where you're going to deploy it or where you're going to reserve it, how it's going to play after that as well. Eric also asks, is there any reason to run indirect pieces besides the mortars you mentioned? I don't think so. I think the indirect pieces are actually quite expensive nowadays, to the point where when you consider how much board control pieces you could get in the midfield for how much an indirect piece costs, I don't think it's worth it. For example, one of the key breakpoints in Guard is the 125 point range, and that's because a Chimera with 10 Catachans is 125 points. When you look at, say, a Basilisk, it's 30 more points than that. When you look at a Manticore, that's obviously like 60 more points. When you look at a Field Ordnance Battery, the 10 Catachan Chimera is only 15 more points than that. And I guarantee you that 10 Catachan and a Chimera is going to win much more games than a Field Ordnance Battery is going to even put out, even if it's a 5-turn game. Because Guard, typically you're trying to win in the first couple of turns when you flip primaries, right? A Field Ordnance Battery is not fantastic against that, I don't think. There's obviously like the other one that ignores indirect penalty and stuff like that. Depending on your meta, you could run a Manticore, but I wouldn't know. I wouldn't recommend it personally. There's also more kind of viable options, like even a Hydra is viable, for example, if you wanted to play one of them. The one of the important things about Guard is that you can run an array of units, but it's more about having the onion. You need to have the onion complete. You don't build a Guard list, for example. Let's go backwards. You do not build a Guard list with the outer onions. You don't build a Guard list primarily of the inner onion. You build it with the core of the onion, and then you support it with the other layers. You're not going to win games by playing all Armored Sentinels, Bulgarins, etc. You're not going to have a very great list with 2 Rogel Dawns, 2 Lehman Russes, for example, when you should be focusing on playing the game and focusing on the points. So as long as you actually try and achieve, you could play what I'm trying to say here is that you can play all of these other and supporting units and data sheets, but the core should be the main core part of the game. Okay. Last couple of questions. What is infantry heavy guard most scared of? In singles, to be honest with you, the infantry builds are actually the strongest types of builds. At Pyra Cup, I played just 60 dudes, and in my singles list I play 70. So I think those builds are usually very good. If you're referring to like all Scion builds, etc., you do need to get a reasonable amount of anti-tank in there as well. Now that the tank commander can order himself, those Scion builds are a lot better because you don't have to take Leon to order the tanks; they can run by themselves. So if you're playing a list like 3 tank commanders and the rest of it's like Scions and Catachans and etc. like that, then perfectly fine list. You could win a GT with that 100%. Okay, cool. There we go, guys. I hope you really enjoyed the kind of lecture, I suppose, so to speak. I will just go through and remind you guys again. This is the 40K Fireside podcast. I'm David Gaylard, And I'm going to answer that one last question that's come up, but then I'm taking it up. I do have a coaching service starting, and if it's something you're interested in, or if you see yourself working with me, I'm really happy to work with players of all skill ranges, depending on what parts of the games you think you're good at, need to improve, whether it's tournament preparation, list design, or if it's just understanding the meta, or if it's trying to push from a 4-1 to a 5-0 consistent player, or if it's trying to get on WTC team, for example, better at teams, your team or club, or if you're a captain of a club, get in contact with me. I'd be more than happy to help you out with a team tournament you've got coming up, list design, team matrix composition, working with players. With New Zealand, I work with a lot of players, coaching them, but also understanding their personalities, their play styles, and etc. like that. You don't have to be playing the cream of the crop, top of the lists. Someone wants to play a Baneblade, we can work with that as well. So just a reminder about the coaching as well. And last question from Dakia. I'm aware that super heavies are not that good right now. If you had to choose one, which variant do you think would be best? What about the Kaskin? Was that 10 points change just bad meta change? I think Kaskin are too expensive. And if I was to play a super heavy, I don't know what I would play because I've never looked at them before. Sorry. I'd probably play one with firing deck and try and put some Ogre in it or something like that. But there we go. All right, guys. Thank you very much. Hope you've enjoyed. Leave a comment down below. Leave some feedback if you found this useful. I'm keen to do more content like this. Doesn't have to be about guard. Could be about something else. If you found the presentation useful, let me know. We could do that in the format again. And if you're a podcast listener, thanks for listening and give us a feedback on whether or not this format is good as well.